Hey, welcome back to MTG and another episode of Good Clean Commander. Today we have our two favorite guests. We have Aaron and Nat, and today we are playing with some was kind of new decks. Lord of the Rings. I think both of us running Lord of the Rings commanders. It's a little not as new anymore, but
They were new to us when we recorded. Oh man.
But why don't you tell us what everyone's playing today?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see it in the thumbnail and the intros, but I think I'm rocking the Sauron, and Nat was doing an old deck that I don't think she had actually updated for quite some time. So running with some older school cards, and then we have the Lord of the Rings stuff, and then Aaron, who's also rocking an old deck too, that I also don't know if he had updated anytime recently. So it's kind of this interesting clash of like old school cards versus like us trying to play like the Lord of the Rings set when it first dropped. But we have since then updated both of our deck lists since, this game.
But yeah, they've received some love between now and then. But yeah, very much kind of new school versus old school in this matchup, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how these decks kind of match up against each other. Because going into it, we really didn't know. We were kind of like, yeah, let's give it a whirl, right? So I think we were pretty excited with the end result. So hopefully everyone enjoys it.
Yeah. So I guess with no further ado, let's have
a good clean
game. Good clean. Yeah. Whoa. Mean mugged. Natasha is playing Obzedat Ghost Council. This is a Voltron deck that wants to win through commander damage. To help with this, Natasha is hoping to remove tricky creatures that can block and rely on her commander's ability to blink at each inset to keep it protected. And in her starting hand, she has a Snow-Covered Plains, a Snow-Covered Swamp, Temple of Silence, Anguish Unmaking, Sword of Feast and Famine, Selfless Glyph Weeder, and a Magus of the Disc. I am playing Sauron the Dark Lord. This deck wants me to use my commander's ability to amass orcs and then use these tokens to gain value and drain the board. I hope to control the board and tempt my way to victory. And in my starting hand, I have a Rogue's Passage, Field of Ruin, Clearwater Pathway, 2 islands, March from the Blackgate, and a Fairy Mastermind. Ken is playing Tom Bombadil. This saga deck wants to lean into Tom's ability to cheat sagas onto the battlefield and outvalue his opponents. And in his starting hand, he has a Sasuke, the Living Lore, Reflection Pool, Druid of the Elysian Grove, Higetsu, Kumzune's All, Mana Confluence, Shroud Claim, and a Nesting Grounds. Aaron is playing the Dragon. This is a list from years ago, and he decided to brush off the dust to give it a go. And for those of you who know what this commander does, it comes to no surprise that Aaron's deck leans into dragon synergies and hopes to discount dragons to keep the pressure on his opponents. And in his starting hand, he has Dragon Lord's Servant, Crucible of Fire, Storm Breath Dragon, Vivid Meadow, Death by Dragons, Terramorphic Expanse, and a Mountain. Natasha starts off the game by drawing and plays a tapped Temple of Silence, scrying 1. She decides to keep it on top of her library and passes to me. I draw for turn and play a Murk Water Pathway and pass to Ken. Ken draws for turn and plays a Mana Confluence. He then passes to Aaron. Aaron draws and plays a Terramorphic Expanse. He sacrifices it right away to fetch up a forest and puts it into play tapped, and then passes to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and plays a Marsh Flats, and cracks it instantly to go fetch up a Godless Shrine and have it enter the battlefield tapped so she doesn't have to pay another 2 life. And passes to me. I untap, draw, and play an island as land for turn. I then pay 2 and cast March from the Blackgate. This allows me to amass 1 orcs on its ETB. Having no other plays, I pass the turn. Ken untaps, draws, and plays a Reflecting Pool as land for turn. He then pays 2 for a Satsuki, the Living Lore, and takes 1 life from the Mana Confluence. With that, he passes to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays a Mountain. He then pays 1 for a Soul Ring. Aaron follows that up by paying 2 for a Dragon Lord's Servant. Between this and an Dragon, Aaron's dragons now cost 2 less. He then passes to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and plays a Snow-Covered Swamp. She then pays 3 for a Selfless Glyph Weaver and passes to me. I untap, draw, and play an island as land for turn, and then I pay 2 for an Arcane Signet. Moving to combat, I swing my 1/1 Orc army at Aaron. On attack, Blackgate triggers, and my Orcs amass 1, making them a 2/2. Aaron blocks with his Dragon Lord, which I realized at that moment was a 1-3. Both of our creatures just bounce off each other. I then pass to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and plays a Nesting Grounds. He then pays 3 and loses a life from Mana Confluence to cast Dryad of the Elysian Grove. This allows him to play an additional land, and he plays Zagoth Triome. Not wanting to draw attention, Ken decides not to attack and passes. Aaron then untaps, draws, and plays a tapped Vivid Meadows. He then pays 4 for a Crucible of Fire. Not wanting Aaron's dragons to get a boost, I decide to respond by paying 2 to cast a Negate. Aaron has no response, so Crucible is countered. Aaron has no other plays after that, so he passes the turn to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and plays a Snow-Covered Plains. She then pays 4 for a Magus of the Disc. This will allow her to pay 1 and tap it to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. The ETB's tapped, and Natasha decides not to attack and passes to me. I untap, draw, and play a Field of Ruin. Deciding not to attack, I then pass to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and pays 4 to cast Sky Shroud Claim. This allows him to fetch up 2 forests and put them into play tapped. He gets a Jetmir's Garden and a Zeator's Proving Ground. Ken then skips combat and passes to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays a tapped Jungle Shrine as land for turn, using Vivid Meadows and removing a charge counter to create a red mana. Aaron then pays another 2 to cast Storm Breath Dragon, thanks to the cost reduction from his creatures. Going to combat, Aaron swings his 4/4 Flying Dragon at me, and I tease Aaron saying that that's the last time I'll let his spell resolve and take the 4. Having no other plays, he passes to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and plays a Command Tower. She then casts her commander Obzedat Ghost Cancel for 5. On ETB, she can drain an opponent for 2 and gain 2. She chooses Aaron. Aaron has no response, so he loses 2 life and she gains 2 life. Having no other plays, she passes to me and goes to end step. In response to Obzedat's end step trigger, I flash in Fairy Mastermind. Obzedat is then exiled until Nat's next turn, where it will ETB for more drain shenanigans. I untap, draw, and play a Rogue's Passage. I then pay 2 and use my Field of Ruin to destroy Aaron's Jungle Shrine so I can fetch up a basic mountain and put it into play. I then go to combat and swing my Orc Army and Fairy Mastermind at Aaron. On attack, my Blackgate triggers and my Orcs become a 3/3. Aaron declares no blocks and takes the 5. I then pass to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and pays 3 for the Weather Seed Treaty. The first chapter allows Ken to search his library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. He grabs a Plains, and then Ken pays 3 for a Zur Eternal Schemer. Not wanting to swing at anyone, he passes. Aaron untaps, draws, and pays 4 for a discounted Brood Mother. Spooked out by the potential of this card, since I don't have a ton of flying creatures, I decide to counter it by paying 2 and cast Saruman's Trickery. Aaron has no response, and his dragon is countered, and I amass 1. With Sadness on the stack, Aaron decides to move to combat and swings Storm Breath at Natasha. She can't block, and it takes 4. With that, he passes the turn. Natasha untaps, and during her upkeep, Obzedat returns to the battlefield. She chooses to have Ken lose 2 life, and she gains 2 from its ETB trigger. Drawing for turn, Natasha then pays 3 for a Sword of Feast and Famine, and pays another 2 to equip it to her commander. This gives her commander protection from black and green. Going to combat, Obzedat's ability gives it haste, and she swings at Ken for 7 commander damage. Unable to block with the sword's protection, Ken takes the 7 and has to discard a card from the sword's trigger. Natasha also gets to untap all of her lands. Ken then discards a Higetsu Consumes All, and second main phase, Natasha pays 2 for a tapped Cold Steel Heart, declaring black for its mana source. Going to end step, Natasha's commander blinks out of existence until her next upkeep. I untap, draw, and respecting the fact that Natasha has a board wipe on a creature, I hold off on casting my commander. I decide to pay 2 for a Fell Warstone, and I then follow that up by paying 4 for a Mirkwood Bats. It resolves, so I decide to pay 1 to enchant it with Kaya's ghost form. Now spooked by Natasha's commander, I decide to hold back my creatures and pass to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and moves his saga to chapter 2. Making a 1/1 Saproline, Ken plays a Spectator Seating as land for turn. Paying 5, Ken then casts his commander, Tom Bombadil, tapping Satsuki to put another lore counter, On his saga, Ken then gets to boost a creature where it gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of basic land types he controls, and at this case, this moment in beautiful time, it's currently 5. Ken gives Zur +5 until end of turn, and Tom also triggers because a saga finished doing all of its chapters and things, and reveals an Elder Dragon War. Since it's a saga, he can put it onto the battlefield. Choosing to read ahead, he starts at chapter 2 to discard any number of cards and draws that many cards because he didn't want to accidentally blow up his own creatures with that first chapter. He discards no cards because he didn't have anything he wanted to get rid of and goes to combat. Swinging Zur, that is now a 6/9 flyer at Nat, she takes the damage and goes to 33. Ken then passes to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and pays 3 for an Icon of Ancestry, declaring dragons on ETB. This now gives his dragons a +1/+1 Anthem boost. Paying 3, he activates Icon's ability to look at the top 3 cards of his library, and he may reveal a card of the chosen type and put it into his hand. Aaron reveals Scourge of Valkis and puts it into his hand. Moving to combat, Aaron swings his Stormbreath Dragon at Natasha. Natasha has no response and takes the 5 damage going to 28, and with that he passes to Natasha. Natasha untaps and her commander returns. She drains me this time for 2, and she goes back to 30 life. She then continues her turn and draws. Natasha then pays 2 to equip Obzedat again with her sword and swings at Aaron, seeing if he'll chump block. Aaron blocks with his Dragon Lord, it dies, and Nat moves to her second main phase where she casts a Phyrexian Reclamation for 1 and passes the turn to me. Her commander blinks away at end step, and I start my turn. I untap, draw, and cast my commander Sauron the Dark Lord. Going to combat, I tell Aaron sorry for swinging my orcs at him, but I want to trigger my commander's ability to discard my hand and draw a new 4. So I swing my 4/4, which becomes a 5/5 on attack thanks to Blackgate. Aaron says he's quite sour on this subject, and we applaud the pun. Having no response, he takes the 5 from my orc army, and my commander's ability triggers because they dealt damage to a player. The rain tempts me, and I select Fairy Mastermind to be my ring bearer. I then may discard my hand and draw 4. I choose to discard the only card in my hand, Baleful Mastery, and draw 4. I then pass my turn to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and moves to the 3rd step of his saga. Making a 4/4 red dragon token with flying, Tom triggers since the saga completed all of its chapters, and he reveals the first Iron Games. When it ETBs, the first chapter makes him a 1/1 white human soldier token. Tapping Susky, Ken adds another lore counter to the Iroh Games, which allows him to put 3 1/1 counters on a target creature he controls, and he chooses Tom Bombadil, making them a 7/7, and with that he passes to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and pays 6 for Artaka World Render. This creature gives an attacking dragon that Aaron controls double strike until end of turn. We have no responses, so it resolves. Going to combat, Aaron swings his Stormbreath Dragon for 5 double striking damage in the air at Natasha, hoping to force her to use the Magus of the Disc. She decides to take the 10, not activating it so she can keep her sword. Aaron then passes the turn. Natasha untaps and her buddy Obzedat ETBs. She has Aaron lose 2 life, sending him to 26. I realize here I forgot my mass trigger from Sauron when Aaron casts his dragon, so I add that really quickly to my orcs, making them a 6/6. Natasha then draws and sacrifices her Selfless Glyphweaver to give all of her creatures indestructible. Glyphweaver is exiled on sacrifice, and Natasha pays 6 for an austere command, declaring both modes that destroy all creatures. Nat's board remains untouched thanks to Glyphweaver's sacrifice, and my Mirkwood bats return thanks to Kaya's Ghost Forms trigger. Going to combat, she swings Obzedat and Magnus at Aaron for 5 commander and 2 regular damage for a total of 7. Unable to block, Aaron takes 7, going to 18, which I think was 1 more damage than he should have taken, but that doesn't change the outcome of the game. Obzedat returns to exile, and I start my turn. I untap, draw, and play a new land to us from the Lord of the Rings set, Dol Amroth. Ken then realizes he missed a dice trigger with his Susky, so we pause to let him resolve it, and he returns Higitsu, consumes all to hand. I then continue my turn and pay 7 to recast my commander Sauron. Going to combat, I swing my Mirkwood bats at Natasha for 2 damage in the air, and unable to block, she takes the 2 and goes to 19. Having nothing else, I pass the turn. Ken untaps, draws, and his saga goes to chapter 3, which does nothing because no longer has a creature with power 4 or greater, and then he pays 3 for Higitsu, consumes all. On cast, this triggers my commander and I amass 1, and because I made a token, Mirkwood Bats also triggers and each opponent loses 1 life. Higitsu, who consumes all resolves and destroys each non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. This means Nat's Phyrexian Reclamation is destroyed, Aaron's Soul Ring, and my little orc friends. Paying 2, Ken then casts Sanctum Weaver. This triggers my commander, and I make my orc friends again. Mirkwood also triggers, and each opponent loses 1 life. Nat sits at 14 life, Ken is at 27, and Aaron is at 16. After this, Ken then pays 4 and takes a life from Mana Confluence for Historian Boon, which allows him to make a 1/1 soldier token when he casts an enchantment. I then amass, making my orcs a 2/2. On ETB, Ken makes 1 soldier, and having nothing else to do, he passes to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays Crucible of the Spirit Dragon as land per turn, and then he pays 5 for Ramos Dragon Engine and passes to Natasha. Natasha untaps, and I remember my Orcs army trigger, making them a 3/3 from Aaron's Ramos cast. Obzedat then returns, and Natasha drains me for 2. She then draws and plays a Bajuka Bog, targeting my graveyard. I have no response, so it's exiled, and then she equips her commander with the sword and swings at me for 7 damage. Since I can't block it from the sword, giving Obzedat protection from black, I take 7 commander damage going to 25. Her sword triggers, and I discard a Chromatic Lantern, and she untaps her lands. Second main phase, Natasha pays 2 for a Remorseful Cleric, which she can sacrifice to exile everyone's graveyards. I amass orcs, making them a 4/4, and then she pays 2 to equip the cleric with the sword. Natasha then moves to end step, where Obzedat blinks away. I untap, draw, and play an untapped Stormcarved Coast as land for turn. I then cycle a Decree of Pain to draw a card and give all creatures -2/-2 until end of turn. This kills both of Ken's creature tokens. I then pay 3 for Grishnak, Brash Instigator, and on ETB I amass 2 and can take control of target non-legendary creature whose power is less than or equal to the amassed army's power. It also untaps and gains haste. My orcs amass to a 6/6, and I select the Remorseful Cleric still equipped with the sword. Going to combat, I then swing Remorseful Cleric, Sauron, and the orcs at Ken for 10 damage, with 5 of that being commander since all the creatures still had -2/-2 until end of turn. And since Nat controls the sword, she untaps her lands instead of me, and Ken discards a card. In response to Sauron's trigger, I sacrifice Remorseful Cleric to exile Aaron's graveyard. Next, the rain tempts me because my orc army dealt damage to a player, and Sauron lets me discard my hand and draw 4 new cards. I discard my Nazgul and make Mirkwood Bats my Ring Bearer. I then pass to Ken. Ken untaps, draws, and moves to step 4 on his Iroh Games, making a gold token. When Nisaga is sacrificed, Ken makes a 4/4 Angel from Historian Boon's trigger. Higetsugu Consume Alls, then moves to Chapter 2 and exiles everyone's graveyards. He then plays a Rockfall Vale as land for turn and pays 7 for his commander. Having no other plays, he passes. Aaron untaps and plays a Dragon Whisperer, and this puts a counter on Ramos. He then pays 3 to tap Icon of Ancestry to look at the top 3 cards of his library. While he's doing that, I add my 2 counters that I forgot to add from 2 spells being cast between Ken and Aaron to my amassed orcs. Aaron reveals no dragons and puts the cards to the bottom. Going to combat, Aaron swings 7 at me, and in response I pay 1 to Brainstorm. Having no answers, I decide to block with the Mirkwood Bats and they die, and no combat damage gets through to me. He then passes the turn to Natasha. Natasha untaps and Obzedat returns. She has Ken lose 2 life, and she goes back up to 20. She then plays a Castle Lochthwain as land per turn, and pays 3 to cast Anguish Unmaking, targeting Grishnak, who is the only creature that I can use to block with. I have no response, so it's exiled. Going to combat, she swings Obzedat at me for 7, and I go to a total of 14 commander damage and 18 life. For the sword trigger, I discard Braids, and Nat untaps her lands. She then pays 2 and equips her sword to Magus, and Obzedat returns to exile on end step. I untap and draw and go to combat. Paying 4, I make my orc army unblockable with Rogue's Passage. I swing my army at Nat for 10 damage. On attack, I should have amassed again because of the gate, but I forgot this trigger because my brain was sleepy at this point. And in response, Nat pays 3 to activate her castle to draw a card. She loses 3 life since she has 3 cards in her hand as part of the activation cost and didn't find an answer to my orcs. Before damage or blocks resolve, Natasha then uses Magnus to destroy all artifacts, enchantments, and creatures. In response, I tap the Arcane Signet to float a black mana, and I realize that floating black mana will disappear after combat and would prevent me from being able to cast Living Death, so instead I decide to return my commander to the command zone. Second main phase, I pay 3 to cast a Nazgul, and it becomes the Ring Bearer on ETB because I had no other creatures. When the ring tempts me, my Nazgul also gets a +1/+1 counter on it, making it now a 2/3 with Death Touch. I am at stage 4 with the Ring Temptations, where my opponents will lose 2 life when my Ring Bearer deals combat damage to them. I then put a tapped Seagate Reborn into play, and with that I pass my turn. Ken untaps, draws, and pays 9 to recast his commander, and passes the turn. Aaron untaps, draws, and pays 4 to cast Channel the Suns, making him 1 mana of each color to get Wooburg and cast Scion of the Ur-Dragon. He then passes to Natasha. Natasha untaps, and Obzedat returns, and she drains Aaron for 2 life. Nat then says she's going to try to knock me out with commander damage and goes into the think tank. With her sword gone, I wonder how she plans to do that. She pays 3 for her Crypt Rats and pays 4 to deal 4 damage to each creature and each player. Nat goes to 12 life, I'm at 14, Ken's at 9, and Aaron goes to 9 as well. She then goes to combat and swings at me for 5 commander damage. I go to a total of 19 commander damage and 9 life. She then passes the turn, and Obzedat returns to exile. I untap, draw, and play a Scalding Tarn. Cracking it, I pay 1 life to fetch up a Watery Grave, and then I pay 2 life to shock it in, going to 6 life. I then pay 10 to recast my commander Sauron, hoping I'll live, and then I pass the turn. Ken untaps, draws, and pays 11 to recast his commander, taking 1 from Mana Confluence. On cast, I amass 1, and with that, he passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and pays 1 to put a storage counter on his Crucible of the Spirit Dragon, and then passes the turn. Natasha untaps, Obzedat ETBs, and drains Ken for 2. He goes to 6, and Natasha goes to 14. She then draws for turn and pays 7 for a Kindred Dominance, naming Advisors. Our board is wiped again, and I return my commander to the command zone. Natasha then goes to combat and swings her commander at me. I go to 1 life, but this is a lethal amount of commander damage, and I'm knocked out of the game. Natasha then moves to end step, and Obzedat returns to exile. Ken untaps, draws, and pays 2 for a Goldberry River Daughter. He then pays 3 for a Restoration of Iganjo. With no other planes in his deck, he just shuffles his library, and then passes the turn to Aaron because he has nothing else he can do. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays a Scourge of Valkis, which is discounted by the Ur-Dragon. On ETB, he deals 1 damage to Natasha's face. He then passes the turn. Natasha untaps, Obzedat returns to the battlefield and drains Ken for 2, putting him at a precarious 4 life, and she goes up to 15. Drawing her card for turn, Nat then pays 3 for a Duelist Heritage, which gives an attacking creature double strike. She then pays 3 to activate her castle to draw a card. She then has 4 cards in her hand and loses 4 life, going to 11. Moving to combat, she sends her commander at Aaron for 5 and gives it double strike with the Duelist's ability. Not wanting to take 10, Aaron blocks with his Scourge. It dies, and Aaron lives to see another turn. Ken untaps, draws, and moves to step 2 of his Restoration of Iganjo Saga, and chooses not to discard a card for its ability to return a permanent with converted mana cost 2 or less. He then pays 5 for Oath of Errol, making 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. Going to combat, he swings Goldberry at Nat for 1 damage, and passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays a swamp as land for turn. Paying 4, he casts Wasatoria Necru Queen. Having no other plays, he passes to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and drains Ken for 2. Ken now at 2, life is barely hanging on, and Nat is back up to 12. Going to combat, Nat swings her double striking commander at Aaron for 10 damage. He blocks with his 1 and only sad lonely creature, which dies, and Nat passes the turn. Ken untaps, draws, and resolves his sagas. He makes 2 knights with trample from Oath, and before a Restoration of Iganjo gets to its 3rd counter, Ken uses Goldberry's ability to remove a lore counter on it to give her 1. Ken can't discard anything to Restoration step, so he ignores it. Then moving to combat, he swings his 2 soldiers and knights at Natasha for 6 damage. Natasha has no response and goes to 6 life, and with that, he passes the turn. Aaron untaps, draws, and pays 6 for Death by Dragons. Aaron has each player but Natasha make a 5/5 dragon. Having no other plays, he passes to Natasha. On Aaron's end step, Natasha pays 1 and 2 life for a vampiric tutor. She then looks for any old card in her library and puts it on top. Natasha then untaps, Obzedat blinks back in, and she drains Ken for the last 2 life he had. Ken is knocked out and joins me in the afterlife. She then plays a Rogue's Passage as land for turn and pays 4 to make her commander unblockable. She then moves to combat and swings for lethal at Aaron. Having no response, Aaron takes the damage and is knocked out. GG's all.
So old school one.
I have to admit, I totally was underestimating that deck the entire time because I legit had discarded like Baleful Mastery, which would have exiled Obzedat, and then I had discarded a board wipe or cycled a board wipe or something that also probably could have dealt. So I had the answers, but I was like, I'm not worried about this. I'm going to win. And then I was like, oh, 5 board wipes later. I'm in danger.
Aside from my card draw issues, it was, I'm going to be honest. I like going into it, I was like, oh, Obzedat's up against the Dragon, up against Sauron, up against Tom's not really much of a threat, but like I was like, oh my god, like
I mean, it is.
How's this gonna fare? And then we just got wiped, literally and figuratively.
Oh my god! No, that was a funny game, especially going back and editing and just like again, kind of kicking myself when I was like, I shouldn't have gotten rid of that.
It's cool that like a commander like that in a deck that is, not necessarily a deck that has been updated for who knows how long, is still like, it still has a seat at the table and it like performed and it won. So it's kind of cool for people to, not have to feel like they need to update constantly because a deck that Nat admits she hasn't updated forever just whipped our butts. And that's great.
So I think for like MVP card then is the sword, and I'm totally blanking on the name, is the one that like let or protection from, I think it was like black and green, right? And then would let you untap all your lands. Feast and Famine, that's right. I was like, why did I forget that sword? You're like, I didn't forget it.
The best sword?
No, that's Sword of Body and Mind.
Yes.
Yeah, we all know it's a fact.
A channel favorite.
No, it's just
but yeah, I would
channel
agree.
reality.
Feast and Famine could end at untapping your lands, but no, the added discard a card
that's
too,
right.
really just like
that too. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was fun though. So Sword of Feast and Famine, definitely MVP because we could not block, most of us. I think you had like a blocker and then it kept getting blown up. So
yeah, a lot of stuff kept getting blown up.
Me, I was just like, crap, most of what I had. I think I only had like 1 creature that could block or something at the end, but it was nuts. Yeah, that was fun overall. I think we have one more game after this before we wrap up for the season end. So, I don't know. Thanks for your patience with this. Also, hope you like the new animations that Olive added. She was working on those, so I'm excited that they're now in the world.
All right. Don't forget, before you leave, like this video and leave us a comment and tell us, do you like board wipes?
Thank you all for watching. Hope you have a good one, and
bye.
Bye. Okay, I was like waiting for you to add the exaggerated wave. Goodbye.